This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
A reminder that it was February 19th when Donald Trump posted a picture of himself wearing a crown saying, "Long live the king, congestion pricing is dead." Well, maybe it's Lazarus, because it sure is back to life now. I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in state government. And on this episode, we're exploring some of the 122 bills sitting on the governor's desk as we record on the morning of December 15th. And our guest is Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter for the Times-Union. Dan, thank you so much for coming into the studio on what appears to be a day off for you.
Hey, I'm so happy.
Do you feel like in journalism that you can actually have a day off, or do you still find yourself checking your phone for the news or emails in a way that goes beyond just maybe what your casual interest in state government and politics might naturally be, and more in a professional capacity?
I think I'm different from a lot of journalists in the sense that I think as an industry, I think most people cannot take time off in the way that they want to.
Sure.
Like they still have to keep up with things. A couple of years ago, I drew a very hard line.
Oh, yes, we've talked a little bit about this.
So when I'm not in this building and I don't have to be looking at whatever is happening here or in state government politics, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not talking about it. That's actually the funny thing is the family gatherings around the holidays. That's the part that's bad for me because that's all anybody wants to talk to me about. Whereas I'm here to not talk about that.
And when it comes to family gatherings and people wanting to bring up issues that intersect with your work, do you find it's the case that people want to pick your brain, or do people kind of say they want to pick your brain and really just offer their own opinions?
Yeah, it's that one. It's
Yeah.
that one for sure. They clearly have an opinion. They want to know what I think, and then they want to tell me what they think in hopes that I'm going to write about that.
And do people ever offer takes where you just have to shake your head and bite your tongue, or do you respond to people's mistakes about how things actually work here or what policies are actually coming out of the Capitol?
I always respond. Oh my gosh. Because nobody knows how this place works except for the people who are involved in it. So when people in my family don't understand, for example, that maybe a bill has to pass both chambers before it goes to the governor, I have to remind them, just because this bill passed the Assembly, it doesn't matter at the end of the day if it doesn't pass the Senate.
Well, sticking with people's misconceptions about the legislative process, I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn about how the 800 or so bills that pass through both houses actually make their way to the governor. I think they'd be surprised by how much of it is back-loaded to the end of the year. What is that process like for you, and how frustrating is it, especially since so much of it is geared around the holiday time when you might want to take a day off or two?
I know. It is frustrating in that sense. The governor has the entire year to consider these bills. I mean, that's on them, right? Like they made that possible.
Sure.
So she doesn't have a timeline that she has to review a bill passed in June by July or something like that. And in part, that's smart because if we were to force a governor to sign or veto 856 bills over a 6-month span, they might make decisions that they might not have made if they heard more input about that bill. That being said, I mean, this governor, and I think Cuomo as well, did not act on a lot of bills over the summer.
Sure.
So they do a lot of summer events, but not so much a lot of legislating as it is. So it all gets stuck at the end of the year here. And where I think between November and December, she will have had to decide around 200 or more bills. That's a lot of bills. And Granted, a lot of these bills that the legislature passes are local bills, so she's going to sign those. Like things like authorizing Monroe County to keep its sales tax above a certain level. Things like that are not going to be controversial. But the tactic of saving everything for the end of the year is intentional. Not only because you need all that input, but also because these decisions happen around a time when less people are paying attention to the news.
Sure.
People are worried about what they're going to get their family for the holidays. They're worried about where their family's going to be staying. They're worried about what they're going to be making for Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner. They're not watching the news to hear about a bill that's been vetoed or signed.
It is stupid, though, when you get, say, a batch of vetoes on a Thursday night or a Friday night in what is clearly a news dump, in the idea that, well, maybe it won't get a lot of attention in the immediacy, but these things will live on if they are important. It's not like people go, we only had one shot to make a big stink about this veto or this bill signing. It can come up in the aftermath.
Yeah, I think it's like a holdover of like more traditional journalism where people had hard print deadlines for a certain time. And in a lot of ways, the system hasn't caught up to the fact that, we're here 24 hours now. And also, if you veto a bill on Friday night, I'm going to write about it Monday. And that might even be worse for you.
Well, I also enjoy how we as reporters sometimes have to become mathematicians plus constitutional scholars when it comes to how many days the governor has to actually act on these bills once they're delivered to her desk, because there's like the Sundays not counting, as we were talking about off air. On Saturdays, the day doesn't count if it's a Jewish governor. It does count if it's a Goy governor. That's a joke for a very niche audience. But I don't even pretend to actually know when that calendar starts. I mean, is that something you have your head wrapped around, or do you just kind of try to muddle your way through it?
I have my head wrapped around it in the sense that I know what I'm counting.
Sure.
I feel sometimes that I might be counting incorrectly, but I mean, I feel like people have a different opinion on this than is usually
well,
what
does
it is.
the day it was sent over, does that count as one of the days?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And because here's the way that I see it. I see it gets sent over on a Monday at 5 p.m. Day one to me starts on Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Especially because your hours are done at 5 p.m. that day.
Exactly. I'm not even thinking about it on Monday night.
It's effectively a bill that was introduced at 9 a.m. the next day.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I think about with this process is how it's very much a black box, unless one of the parties wants to leak something out, the way we saw with the pending legislation dealing with regulations for artificial intelligence. And it seemed like everybody and their mother had a copy of the governor's draft proposal, and that comes as the result of a willful leaking. And I wonder what your experience with this is like, because unless you're really on top of either the bill sponsors or have a good legislative source in the governor's office, it can be hard to figure out the fate of these bills, because stakeholders often find themselves on the outside looking in, and there's a lot of rumors, but maybe not a lot of hard facts.
I don't have the time to check in with everybody. That's the thing, is like, that's another part of this system that is by design, is if the governor calls up 155 bills, and let's say 12 of them are extremely consequential, we have to prioritize what's going to be most consequential when she decides to make those decisions all on the same day.
Sure.
And we can break it out later. But if I have 12 bills that I'm watching that I think are really important that might get chapter amendments, I don't have time to call every sponsor of that bill, every lobbyist that's watching that bill to say, what have you heard? Especially when there's a good chance that what they've heard may not be true or may be old information.
Exactly, because that is such a changing
Right.
conversation. It's like, no, that's the draft from 2 days ago, and it's slowly trickled out to you guys. You don't know about the latest version of chapter amendments.
Right.
So one of the themes, at least to me, that stood out from some of these 122 bills, whether it's the newsier ones or some of the ones that we just happened to cover throughout the year, is how many of these bills seem to be compromises to begin with, and now what you're talking about are additional compromises. So one bill I know you wanted to talk about was the bill dealing with some of the consumer protections, the Fair Business Practices Act, but there are other bills like reporting of child abuse and some of the tweaks they had to make to removing the idea of anonymous reporting. There's another one dealing with consumer litigation funding, aka lawsuit lending. That has been watered down from the version that was kicking around for years. I wonder whether you think this is a good thing or this is just how you get bills through the legislature.
I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing at the end of the day, because it's almost like a faux veto in a way. The legislature has already negotiated this bill. They passed it. It's up to the governor to decide it.
They almost negotiate against themselves, too, in the sense that they concede on a lot of these issues before the bill gets to the governor's desk. One though example where this is not the case is probably the bill dealing with single-use plastic packaging restrictions, where Senator Pete Harckham will go and tell anybody, hey, I'm still looking to negotiate this bill.
Right.
Please just pass it, and then we can have those negotiations. But I digress, and I apologize for interrupting.
No, you're fine. And I think that this governor uses chapter amendments more than our previous governor, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think there was a New York Focus story to that extent a couple of years ago at this point now.
Yeah, so it's almost like, I say faux veto because it's like the legislature's negotiated this, right? They're waiting for the governor to make a decision, and suddenly the governor's office says, we want to do X, Y, Z to this bill, or we're not going to sign it. So it's almost like, I don't know the word for it. It's like holding somebody to something that is not true at the end of the day. Like, people are being pushed into something that they didn't think they were going to be pushed into when they passed this bill, and when they were already lobbied by 1 million people on this bill, and they came up with a version that seemed to satisfy everybody. But then those lobbyists behind the scenes are going to the governor's office and saying, yeah, we know we told them that we're okay with this version, but we actually want like these changes. So if you could do that for us, that'd be great. And they're doing it.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the lobbyists, they make a calculation where, okay, at the end of the day, we can only get so far with these lawmakers, so then we give up the fight there and we pivot our attention to the governor's office. And you see that in the lobbying files when it's like July and August lobbied the executive chamber on XYZ issue. But let's talk a little bit about that bill from Assemblymember Michael Asher and I believe Senator Leroy Comrie that's been pushed at the urging of the governor. What do you think we should know about this version of the Fair Business Practice Act as it exists right now?
So it's very different from when it was first proposed. Big priority for New York Attorney General Letitia James this year. This basically broadens when the state can sue businesses on behalf of consumers, because they argue that those protections at the federal level are being very much watered down, so they want to step it up at the state level. When it was first introduced, it was going to allow the Attorney General to bring these cases and any private litigant in the state. At the end of the day, the bill came out and was negotiated, and it took away that private litigant option. So now only the state can pursue something. If a business treats you bad and you say to the state, hey, this isn't great, and the state says, well, we're not going to do anything about it, you don't have any options. There's no protections for you there. You can't bring your own lawsuit on behalf of this law.
And that's something we see with a lot of bills when the lawmakers are trying to figure out what the enforcement mechanism looks like. It's a question of, well, do we give this handout to the State Trial Lawyers Association and create a private right of action, or do we simply add on to the ever-growing list of responsibilities that the State Attorney General's office has? And I'm always curious about when they choose one or not the other, or end up doing both of them, for example. But there definitely seems to be a calculation there that at least at the start, both are on the table, maybe?
Yeah, I guess. Some bills go straight for the Attorney General's office and don't offer a private right of action. I think that we see pretty regularly them expand private rights of actions in the legislature, and I only know that because we get a lot of I get a lot of email, at least, from trial lawyers and people saying, hey, this bill is important, or other people saying, hey, this is going to open up the door for way more lawsuits and is going to clog up our courts. But then again, that's also like is the sky falling kind of argument about that. So sometimes we do obviously see private rights of actions explode, like with the Child Victims Act.
Sure.
I mean, like, that's huge, right?
And that was the purpose, though.
Yeah, that was exactly the purpose. Other times, I think just because of education, people don't take advantage of the laws, or they don't know what's available to them. So I think that's another part of it is if people aren't going to use the laws, why fight with somebody to get that included in there?
For the holiday season, Dispatches from Planet Albany is offering a special gift when you support the show. A $50 contribution or recurring commitment of $5 a month gets you a 12 by 9 poster celebrating life in Planet Albany. More information, including a link to donate, can be found wherever you listen to this podcast. Support for Dispatches from Planet Albany provided by National Fuel. Natural gas delivers affordable, reliable energy to millions of New Yorkers every day. Trusted utilities are committed to keeping homes warm, businesses running, and communities thriving. Natural gas is a critical part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy, one that prioritizes sustainability for the Empire State's future. Learn more at betterplannobans.com. So another bill that we've covered on this show from a different angle or two was the Hevesy bill dealing with reporting suspected child abuse or maltreatment to the Central Register and being required to at least leave your name and contact information with the expectation that it's going to be kept confidential. That feels on its face like one of those bills where the governor may be uncomfortable about signing it and is going to be probably looking for additional caveats or guarantees that people's information will be kept safe or that people won't stop calling, but I haven't really heard anything about it at this point. One of the things I try to do with the bills that are delivered to the governor and my own sort of game of forecasting is I look at the vote tally, and if there's a bill that passed unanimously, then one might think that, oh, well, it's going to be approved by the governor, but it could be one of those bills where they're expecting the governor to veto it. And something like this child abuse registry bill is one where it looks like the Republican conference in the Assembly voted against it, but there are only 2 votes in opposition in the Senate, so I don't have a lot of tea leaves that I can read here, except for the idea that if Senate Republicans weren't up in arms about this, maybe the governor is going to be inclined to rubber stamp it. But at the same time, anything that takes this long to get to the governor's desk suggests they're debating whether they're going to sign it or not. Because we don't get a lot of vetoes early on in the year, right? I mean,
No.
they all come, unless it has to do with the budget, they all come in the fall and later, right?
Right, exactly. And with the child abuse hotline bill, I mean, you could also see it from the governor's perspective of almost limiting her authority a little bit. If you have to collect that personal information and there's a chilling effect, it's almost like saying, the executive branch, the people enforcing this law, aren't doing a good enough job to treat people fairly. And as a governor, you might say, well, I can treat people fairly. I can fix whatever you think is wrong with the system while keeping these anonymous calls.
So one of the bills that we covered on this show has to do with state police troopers getting time off if they're involved in a critical incident, a use of force, basically. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this was, one, it doesn't apply to all members of law enforcement, and 2, while pretty much everything else about the way a member of law enforcement's benefits are determined are done through collective bargaining, this would be done through statute. And when we talked with the union representing state police about this issue, their take on the first issue was, well, sucks to be you guys. And then number 2 was basically, we just think this is a good way to tackle this, and suggested to me that they didn't want to have to concede anything in collective bargaining to get this benefit. But does it speak to you to any sort of larger themes about state government and the way certain issues are prioritized and certain things are ignored, that there is this type of bill that is so narrow in focus when it probably should have a broader lens, and it is a carve out in a way that wouldn't necessarily be the way that benefits are obtained by members of a union?
Yeah, and I'm surprised that it didn't touch local law enforcement. I mean, it's clearly a bill that was requested by some entity, I'm assuming the state police.
Yeah, well, at least by the union members.
Yeah, exactly, by the union members. The state has a complicated relationship with a lot of unions, and especially some law enforcement unions. For example, the Environmental Conservation Police.
Sure.
They're all competing with each other for benefits, and I think
and people.
And people. And I think when you have all of those competing interests, I think there's almost a like, I'm going to get this for me. I can't fight on behalf of all of you as well, because then it complicates the conversation. At the same time, you're completely right. I don't know why it wouldn't touch other law enforcement officers that also have critical incidents, meaning that they have to take lives at certain points. So I think it's a win for their members, but on the sense of collective bargaining overall, one could argue that if they have to do this by statute and they couldn't get this either through collective bargaining or some other way, what does that say about the state's concessions during collective bargaining with these unions? Does it say that the state is not willing to concede a lot on time off or other benefits that they would want?
Another bill that just sort of annoys me, because I think it's emblematic of a larger abdication by the legislature, has to do with a bill that authorizes the Secretary of State to appoint a person from the Utility Intervention Unit within the Consumer Protection Division to serve on the state's Energy Planning Board. And to me, this is part of a larger theme where state lawmakers say, well, I want to look out for the little guy. I want to make sure that whether it's the Public Service Commission or this long-term energy planning, we're looking out for the little guy. And we have bills all over the place every year that are supposed to advance that perspective. But these lawmakers ultimately control all of these processes. They are giving these mandates to the Public Service Commission that are what drive, to a certain extent, maybe it's debatable, costs. And when they're saying, well, why don't we adopt a consumer protection person who's going to look out for the little guy, it's like, look in the mirror. And
yeah.
I mean,
they are the person who's supposed to look out for the little guy.
Yeah. And I'm not going to be surprised if the governor vetoes this, because they don't like being told how to shape these commissions, planning boards, task force, what have you. But every single year, it seems like we're going to get more of these from the legislature. It's like we're playing the hits.
Yeah, it's delegation. I mean, that's all it is. And it should be said, the Energy Planning Board is about to approve the energy plan.
Sure.
So this bill won't do anything for at least 2 years when they have to review the plan.
So that gives the governor then another reason to veto this.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, oh, they've already acted, so this bill is a moot point, and therefore, let's revisit in the future, guys.
Right. And in theory, this is a person who would advocate on behalf of residential ratepayers in terms of cost, but also environmentalists in terms of renewable energy priorities. And it's almost like the legislature saying, I don't know how to represent these people. And that's fundamentally flawed. If you're telling me that you really have no ideas on how to lower energy costs without jeopardizing renewable energy development, if you're telling me that you are that limited in scope and you think that you are that limited in power, then I think that the legislature might want to take a step back and really look at its power and realize that it can actually do things, especially when at least one chamber has a veto-proof majority. Second chamber could get there this year's elections, if the Democrats win. It's a lot of the legislature saying, we did something without doing anything at all.
And also, in the case of this Energy Planning Board, the legislature has the ability to appoint members to it. So
Yes.
Theoretically, they could appoint someone with a consumer protection lens, and maybe that's, in the case of the Assembly, what they are thinking with having Assembly Energy Committee Chair Dee Dee Barrett on the committee. But also, there are agency members on there, and all of the agency members had to be approved at one point by the state Senate. So maybe if you're concerned about the consumer protection lens, bring it up then. Bring up these issues at that point and confirm or don't confirm them based on how they respond to this and what your perception is of how they're going to approach these issues, I guess.
And the Energy Planning Board is not in the state constitution, which means that they could literally change statute at any time. The legislature could. They could change how the energy plan is developed. They could change how often it's reviewed, or at least propose to change. The governor could also veto those things. But the legislature also has an extreme amount of power just in the energy issue. They could pass a bill that says utility companies can't get this amount of profit. They could pass a bill that says utility companies cannot do X, Y, and Z to raise rates for consumers, as they did with a bill that was just approved by the governor from Jonathan Jacobson that says that the utility companies are going to have to detail more closely their capital expenditures that lead to rate increases. Because right now there are detailed plans from utility companies, but maybe the state could look at them and say, hey, you could be more efficient in this.
Finally, we have talked, we don't need to bring this up again, about the threshold of a news event that would require you to get up out of bed or break into whatever you're doing outside of the work hours. But of these bills that are pending the governor's signature, are there any of them where a bill action, whether it's a veto or a signing, would prompt you to begin working outside of that 9 a.m. to 5 schedule?
No.
None.
No.
Nothing.
No. Because none of these bills are going to change the world between when she signs it at 8 p.m. and when I get to work at 9 a.m. the next day. I understand news outlets want to be first. That's great. I love that for them. I want to retain my sanity. And all of these bills, they're very, very important. But if the public learns about them at 9 p.m. when nobody's going to read the news versus if they learn about them at 10 a.m. when more people are reading the news, I don't think it really matters at the end of the day. That type of urgency is more for lobbyists and people who are already tracking these bills.
Sure.
They don't need me to write about it for them. They're going to be using Capitol Confidential Pro to track these bills and get email alerts on decisions.
Well, we've been speaking with the smoothest salesman at the Capitol. It is Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter for the Times-Union. Dan, thank you for violating your own work-life balance by coming in here on a day off and speaking with us. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. This is the one thing that would get me to work between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m.
More than anything else, I wake up and go to bed thinking about affordability.